Okay, it says it's about to go live. Okay. I think we're ready to go. So, all right. Thanks everyone for your patience. Thanks to anyone who's joining live, and for those of you who watch the recording later. We're happy to have you here today. My name is Janelle. I'm co-founder of Mindful Nurses together with Claudia Wong. And we created Mindful Nurses to support nurses' mental health and well-being with mindfulness, holistic wellness, and self-care practices. And we're kicking off this weekly event, Wellness Wednesdays, to invite members of the Mindful Nurses community to share so we can hear from everyone in the community about what self-care and wellness practices you're using. And today we have a wonderful presentation by Nayabei Barretto, and she will be sharing with us about fasting. And Naya is a nurse practitioner and also has a background in public health. And she's very passionate about holistic lifestyles and fasting in particular. And I will turn it over to her to share her wisdom with us today. Thank you so much for coming, Naya.
No problem. Thank you, Janelle. So it'll be a little bit of a shorter presentation, but we'll see how far we can get. So I'm sharing about information about fasting, and here's the disclosures. I do use the product called Prolon in my practice. So this is my husband, and this was last year. And at the beginning of March, he started a modified fast with 500 calories a day. And this is last week in San Francisco, having some fun in the city. So he lost over 55 pounds and really gained a lot of energy, feels better. He also got off blood pressure medications, cholesterol levels decreased, and overall has been doing really well since. So there's a big aspect also of his journey was a plant-based diet. We have kind of changed our whole household to plant-based, and it's made a difference just in how we feel and our overall health. And we have some ways to look at different types of diets, and fasting in particular can be keeping in mind to know whether there's studies available, if there's any long-term data. That can be really hard to come by, unfortunately. Usually there's not much past 1 year for a lot of different methods, and also weighing how that method does in terms of mass preservation versus removing the bad fat that we don't want, all the visceral fat, as well as the risks. It can be confusing because there's so much information out there, and I myself feel like this sometimes. You hear one thing one day, and then the next day there's a different research that contradicts that. So it can be hard to look through all of the different data and information. But intuitively, and just in terms of what's available in our evolutionary history, we really haven't had very long with the fridge and 24/7 availability of food. And in the past, there were some days with good hunting and others without. So fasting has definitely been part of our history for thousands of years. Hippocrates, father of medicine, said our food should be our medicine, or medicine should be our food, but to eat when you're sick is to feed your sickness. So long time after this, we're looking that he might there was definitely something there to look into. Fasting is part of many different religious practices. All the main religions have elements of fasting, as well as including the Native American practices. And these are some of the main groups that exist in terms of fasting. And it's good to note that there's a big difference between all of them. Whether we're speaking about water only versus very low calorie, plant-based, using meal replacements, the 5-2, and the fasting mimicking diet. So the two that I've worked with before is the fasting mimicking diet, as well as a very low calorie diet. And I don't have as much experience either with water only, which I think is fascinating, and the 5-2, which I think has been very popular, and I think people see a lot in the media. So just a little bit of information, overview in terms of the water only is that definitely requires medical supervision. Based on my discussion with a provider who does water fasting, who practices that with patients, they do weekly labs. Electrolytes, following electrolytes, a big part of it. And they minimize the physical activity to reduce the risk of muscle loss. We go back to that point that's important in terms of muscle loss. And because there's so much potentiation of medications during that time, they discontinue most of it. That's something also you have to be really careful, I think, with any fasting, is things like insulin. Your body becomes a lot more sensitive. So if somebody has diabetes and they use the same amounts of insulin while they're fasting, they could really be at risk for problems, including death. So very low calorie diets also do require medical supervision. The classification, the definition is usually a diet of 800 calories or less, and average weight loss is about 44 pounds. I think one important thing here is also what happens after a very low calorie diet, especially if it's not plant-based. It's really key for long-term success, for weight loss specifically. The 5-2 diet plan consists of 2,000 calories a day, or about, you having a Mediterranean style diet, which is one of the diets that apparently has been studied the most and has the most data behind it as being beneficial. And then 2 days with a limit of 500 calories that are low in carbohydrate. Michael Mosley is a British doctor, and he popularized the diet. He's also a journalist and has a book. So I think this is the one I hear the most in the media, but I don't see as much data behind it either. So the fasting mimicking diet is the result of 20 years of study by Dr. Longo and his team in the University of California, LA. And the idea behind it is to have the lowest amount of calories possible while your body still feels, reacts like it's fasting, and the processes that go along with fasting can occur. So it's almost like pretending for your body that it's a water only fast while still having some calories, and anywhere from about 800 to 1,200 per day. But it's only done for 5 days, once a month for 3 months. That's the trial that they did that showed benefits from this. And before they did human trials, he did extensive work with mice and yeast. And the interesting thing is that there are similar processes in these organisms. So whether he did the studies with the yeast or with mice or humans, the actual genes involved in aging seem to be similar in the three organisms. And it is low protein, which at first I thought it was surprising, because I feel that my whole professional life I've been hearing about the importance of protein, how important protein is for us, and animal protein as well as plant-based. And it turns out that protein can actually accelerate aging, particularly animal protein. So that's something that he has pointed out. And the 5-day fasting mimicking diet is plant-based. So just the sort of overall picture, why it makes sense to me, and how the fasting mimicking diet in particular works is that it's giving, probably as well as the water fasting, it's giving a body a break. And I feel like, in any situation, we all need a break. So our bodies do too. And it's a break from sugar, alcohol, and animal protein. And then that enables the body to really heal itself. It's going to activate self-healing just by having a break from those things. There's more involved, but that by itself, I think, makes a big difference. And it also goes into a protective mode, and to be able to build up the cells and parts of the cell that got recycled during the fasting. And the very last point, I think it's something that we can be considered and added. We don't talk very much about spiritual growth, self-reflection in any of our fields. It seems like there's just no time, and it's not how most of the time the system works. But I think as holistic nurses, people interested in this full health, that's something else that can be added. And there's that link to spirituality and being part of self-growth in religion as well, and having that connection with fasting. So I think that's present, and it can be emphasized. So as far as some of the research behind the fasting mimicking diet is that one of the ways it really works, it produces benefits, is by decreasing insulin levels. If in our Western diet, we have insulin levels through the roof, probably most of the time, multiple times a day, every time we're eating processed foods, sugar, high carbohydrates. So just having the insulin levels decrease gives your body a break and sets off a cascade of events that can help with rejuvenation. It also decreases inflammation. That's been proven by lower CRP levels. And one very important item is that it's lowering cancer-promoting growth hormone called IGF-1. Now, once I started looking into the literature of fasting, that keeps coming up, IGF-1 decreasing, and how important that is. So there's two genes that were found to be activated in the research from Dr. Longo by sugar and animal protein that accelerate aging. That's the TOR-S6K and PKA. And as I mentioned, that repeats in mice, it repeats in humans. So there's definitely a link, and it seems like it's really good science behind this. And this last concept of autophagy is the body rebuilding itself, eating itself, and then that allows for rebuilding after the fast. And it's a process that occurs all the time. And for example, our red blood cells, they turn over every 3 months. There's turnover in the bone. So it's a process that's happening all the time, but it's in a way it's assisted and accentuated through a fast. This is the complicated science behind autophagy and different enzymes involved. One of the parts that gets recycled, that recycling gets activated and ramped up with fasting, is of the mitochondria. So the energy building, the motors behind cells go through a breakdown, and it's believed that the breakdown that occurs with fasting specifically goes after parts of cells that are damaged to begin with. So when the body goes into a lower calorie and self-protection mode, it's going to get rid of the things that are not working well first. There we go. And then some of the also very exciting and newer data, and I think we'll hear more about this over the next couple of years, is this possibility of stem cell activation. Through the fast, there's that recycling of parts of cells and probably overall tissue in the body. And there's indication that happens in our immune system. It happens in the liver, the pancreas, and the body has the ability to engage stem cells to build up those tissues after a fast. So, and that's also why it's so important what we do after a fast, how we rebuild the cells, the partial cells that have been recycled. The other potential is the microbiome. There's so much happening in terms of research with the microbiome. And so the fast having that potential to shape and improve the community of microbes in the gut. Okay, it's very exciting. And of course, we'll have to learn more about what kinds of fasts work the best. You know, if it's water fast and for how long. There's some indication that one day water fast is not going to do a whole lot for you, and really it has to be a longer process. So after a fast, if we go through this recycling experience, and the best way to then bring the body back to optimal health, I think there's so much information, good data that hands down plant-based is the way to go. The body works with it better. There's decreased inflammation, decreased risk of cancer, and overall also the activity level. The recommendation is 30 minutes, 5 times a week. Seems like right around that we get the most benefit, and a whole lot more. There's a little bit less benefit, but you know, that's kind of like a good amount to aim for, as well as the stress management, and then that combination of going through a renewal, through a fast, and then giving your body what it needs to rebuild. It has a huge potential for reducing cardiovascular risk and cancer risk. And so going forward, one of the recommendations after doing something like a fasting mimicking diet is to follow a longevity diet that has been coined as well by Dr. Longo. And it's plant-based. The proteins mostly are coming from legumes. So beans, lentils, garbanzo beans. And, you know, I was actually really surprised when I started looking at the amount of protein in plants, that you can get quite a bit of protein from things like garbanzo beans. And 1.5 cups is going to give you, about the same as a boiled egg or having 4 ounces of meat. And I think it's been ingrained so much into us that you have to have animal protein, you have to have meat, or you're going to be low in protein. And I'm starting to realize that's not necessarily true. Plants can provide a good amount of protein, as well as fiber and minerals, and things that are good for our bodies. So going back to this concept of a low protein diet, extending life, promoting longevity, the recommendation is somewhere between 0.31 to 0.36 grams per pound of weight per day. And it's relatively on the lower side from what I think I've been told before, that the amount of protein that you need can actually, the idea is that it can actually promote longevity. Limiting animal protein to 3 times a week, primarily fish, seems to also be promote longevity. And then that after age 65, needs change. And I haven't heard a whole lot about that besides in the information from Dr. Longo. So I'd be really interested in researching that more. But apparently after age 65, our bodies have different needs and do require a bit more of the animal protein, but not a whole lot. So 10 to 15% more usually is what our bodies can work with. Some things to consider in terms of using fasting and the potential difficulties or dangers is that if somebody already has an eating disorder, this could exacerbate that. I know there's some cases where it is used to treat eating disorders, but I think that probably requires quite a bit of experience, having somebody who has worked in those settings and has the background for helping with the mental aspect of it. And then I just learned about this concept of orthorexia, excessive preoccupation with eating healthy food. I didn't know this existed a few months ago. So something else to consider, if it's just taking over our lives and our social, healthy eating then and being social, then it probably could turn into negative aspect. Electrolyte imbalance is also a big part of what we need to have caution around. Potassium in particular can decrease during a fast, as well as sodium. And if it gets to extreme levels, of course, that can be very dangerous. Gallstone formation is also potential risk. It seems that it works well to keep meals to about a 12-hour window. So from the time we wake up, 8 a.m., have our last meal finished by 8 p.m. That promotes health, and keeping the window too large on fasting and may increase gallstone formation. So if we only have food for 8 hours and then fast the rest of the 24 hours, that may actually increase the risk of gallstone formation. And I know there's some methods like that out there in terms of fasting. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is with rapid weight loss, that's a risk. And with the in our practice, we usually start patients on ursodiol for preventing gallstones. There's not a whole lot of significant side effects with the fasting, but it has been mentioned headaches, fatigue, and I think a lot of it can also be from getting rid of caffeine and sugar. You know, those two are, they can be addicting, and people can go through some kind of withdrawal when stopping the caffeine and the sugar. Some resources. Dr. Greger has amazing information. I've learned so much through his website. So if you haven't looked into nutritionfacts.org, definitely recommend them. And this is an example of a water fasting program that happens to be in the same town where I'm in Santa Rosa, here in California. And the information by Dr. Fong, I think it's really interesting as well. He specializes in water fasting and diabetes treatment, but I don't have really a whole lot of experience with him. These are some ideas if you're interested to look into it further and to learn more. And there we are. So if you have any questions, I know we had to do the format a little bit differently. Feel free to send me a message, and I'll get back to you.
Thank you so much, Naya. Thank you for sharing with us today. That's super interesting presentation about fasting. And yeah, I'm just curious, for someone who's really new to fasting, maybe who's never fasted before, what would you recommend as just an easy way to kind of get started with this practice?
Well, I do think that Prolon has made it as easy as it could be. And there's, so with the Prolon 5-day program, you get a box and it's labeled number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have online support, and it's a way to have the ability to do the fasting from home. I think it gets more complicated for anyone who has high blood pressure or any condition when they're taking medications. Then that probably requires really close follow-up, either with primary care or finding a specialist who does fasting. But Prolong, I would say it's a pretty good program, and it is designed for home use. But other than that, there's a ton of information online. It's really, I think, a matter of discerning and being careful, because there's so much out there that it's sometimes hard to know what's what. So there are a group of people that are DIY on the fasting mimicking diet and seem to have good results with it. I haven't really heard enough about it to know the pros and cons or potential risk, but that is available.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's really inspiring to me, actually, your presentation to practice this. There's a lot of science behind this that I hadn't learned of before, with the cancer reduction in risk of cancer and increased longevity. So it makes a lot of sense, and I really appreciate how you point out that it would be ideal to combine the fasting with some spiritual reflection and time for meditation, because yeah, it makes sense when we're kind of detoxing our bodies like this, that we need this time to rest, and both for our bodies and for our minds and spirit. So yeah, it's a really wonderful practice, and I'm interested to learn more. And yeah, as Naya shared, we will be sending around her contact information. So if any of you who are watching this live or watching the recording later have questions, we'll be posting the video along with Naya's contact information if you want to reach out to her and get more information. So thank you so much for joining us today, Naya, and thanks everyone for watching. Yeah. Have a good evening. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.